While my son's coffin was still open and the scent of the lilies was heavy in the chapel, she appeared suddenly. Audrey, my son's ex-wife, who had abandoned him 8 years ago, now demanding the mansion and the $12 million in inheritance he had left for me. What happened at that funeral started a war and revealed who truly stood by his side when it mattered most. But before we proceed, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. When the chapel doors swung open on that dreary afternoon in Los Angeles, my heart was already shattered into a million pieces. My son's coffin, so elegant and solemn, rested, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies, the flowers he loved so much. The music he used to listen to had just played for the final time, leaving only a heavy silence in the room. It was in that sacred moment of grief that she appeared. Audrey entered as if arriving at a business meeting, not the funeral of the man she had deserted 8 years prior. The sound of her 4-inch heels cracked the silence like a hammer blow, making everyone turn. Her black dress, far too short for the occasion, looked like a second skin. But it was that calculated smile at the corner of her mouth that chilled my blood. "I am here to claim what belongs to me," she announced in a clear, rehearsed voice, projecting it for all to hear. "The $12 million and the mansion my husband left. As his legal spouse, I have every right to it." The air was sucked out of the room. Some gasped, others turned in confusion. But me? I kept my eyes fixed on my son's coffin, on his name engraved in gold lettering. He hadn't even been interred, and she was already there, like a vulture, trying to tear away what was left. It wasn't sadness I felt at that moment. It was an intense heat rising through my chest, tightening my throat. A silent fury that settled heavily behind my ribs. My late husband always used to say that I had the patience of a stone. That day, I needed every single ounce of that patience. Audrey's young lawyer was visibly nervous beside her, flipping through papers in a brown portfolio. His voice trembled as he mentioned terms like surviving spouse and marital rights. He didn't even know she had signed a divorce settlement years ago. I looked to my right, where Sarah, my lawyer, was already discreetly taking a folder from her purse. She gave me a small nod. "Not yet," her look said. "Just wait." The whispers started to spread through the chapel like wildfire. Audrey's entrance didn't just break the silence. It shattered any illusion of peace I had tried to maintain. The attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down, unable to witness the spectacle. Others stared at me, waiting for me to fall apart, but I did not. Slowly, I turned to face her. Audrey didn't flinch when our eyes met. There was a cold confidence in her gaze, the kind of confidence that only exists in people who believe they have won before the battle even begins. She lifted her chin slightly, proud. Perhaps she expected me to beg, cry, or make a scene, but I remained still, and that seemed to shake her, because her voice grew louder, more insistent. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to take what is legally mine." Finally, I spoke, my voice colder than hers, perfectly controlled. "You are not his wife." "Not anymore." For a second, she hesitated. Her lawyer whispered something, turning a page, but I could see it on her face. She expected me not to know the law. She expected me to be too distraught to react. She thought this funeral was her stage, and that I would be too broken to fight back. It was then that Sarah stepped forward, silent as a shadow, and handed the minister a copy of the divorce decree. Stamped, sealed, notarized. The total renunciation of any future claim on his assets had been finalized more than 7 years ago. I didn't need to say another word. The truth was there, printed in official ink, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Someone coughed nervously. Another muttered softly, "Oh my God." Audrey remained still, lips tightly pressed, eyes scanning the pews of the chapel. She was waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. And I stood there, not triumphant, not arrogant, just firm, I spent 8 years supporting my son after she left him, with nothing but debts and a broken heart. I was present at every doctor's appointment, every hospital stay, every sleepless night when the pain was stronger than the medication. She was absent, completely gone, until the money was worth coming back for. When I finally turned to leave the chapel, I did not look back. I walked toward the exit with Sarah by my side, our steps slow and steady, as if we were marching toward a battle that was just beginning. I heard someone whisper my name with sympathy. Another said, "Justice." But I didn't need sympathy. I didn't want justice. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What was coming would make the funeral seem like merely a prelude. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering dry leaves around the stone steps. Sarah caught up to me and silently handed me a large manila envelope. I tucked it under my arm, without saying a word. Both of us knew it would be needed very soon. The funeral director met us at the entrance, clearly disturbed, to apologize for the interruption. I told him not to worry. "Death does not always bring dignity," I replied. He didn't know what to say after that. It took us exactly 15 minutes to reach Sarah's office at Associates, downtown. The secretary had already prepared the meeting room, closing the door behind us with a soft click that seemed to seal the outside world out. Sarah placed 2 documents on the dark wood table and smoothed them with precise hands. The first was my son's updated last will and testament, dated 6 months before he passed. I was sitting next to him when he signed it, his hands thin but firm. In the document, he left all assets to me. The money, the company shares, the mansion, the insurance, even the rights to the application he had created in his final months. There was no mention of Audrey. Not a single line. The second document was the 8-year-old divorce settlement, a total waiver of future rights to any current or future assets, finalized and notarized. Sarah had the certified copy in hand, along with the official court registry. No loopholes, no ambiguity. Even so, Sarah's voice was cautious when she spoke. Audrey has nothing to stand on, but she is bold. I believe she will escalate this. I felt my jaw clench, not out of fear, but out of absolute resolve. If Audrey wanted to turn this into a war, I would meet her on the front lines. I had mourned my son with every fiber of my being. Now I would defend what he left behind. Sarah handed me a copy of the inventory of assets, carefully listed in categories. I took a quick look. Bank accounts, company shares, the beach house, the city apartment, even the sports car. Then I saw the last item. A private video letter recorded by my son and digitally stored under legal protection. I didn't know he had done that. Sarah tapped the folder with determination. "It's time." We drove to the courthouse for a meeting Sarah had scheduled with the judge responsible for emergency probate proceedings, a courtesy granted due to the value of the assets and the obvious attention surrounding them. He agreed to review the files in advance and confirmed that Audrey's claims would be marked as invalid as soon as they were filed. A temporary protective order on the assets was issued within 1 hour, a record even for Sarah, who rarely showed surprise, but slightly raised her eyebrows when the document arrived so quickly. As we left, the sky had darkened, clouds closing in like a curtain before a storm. Sarah's phone rang as we were on the courthouse steps. It was Audrey's lawyer. She answered on speakerphone, allowing me to hear every word. His voice trembled as he asked for a meeting to discuss a possible friendly resolution. Sarah replied with professional coldness. All conversations were to be in writing, and Audrey's interference at a religious service would be included in any formal response. I didn't speak during the call. I didn't need to. I spent years being silent for peace, for my son, for the family. That time was over the moment Audrey said $12 million in front of his coffin. That night, at home, I opened the private video letter. My son was sitting in the chair near the window, the same chair where we used to read together when he was just a boy. His voice was calm, his tone clear and firm, despite his evident physical fragility. He spoke about the foundation he wanted me to build, the scholarships for underprivileged youth, the treatment center for people with the same illness as him. He spoke about me, about how I supported him, about the strength he hoped I would continue to show, even after he was gone. Then, near the end, he said something I will never forget. "If she comes back, Mom, I need you to stand firm, not just for me, but for you. She walked away when I needed her most. But you, Mom, you never left me. You deserve everything I left you. I chose you." I replayed that last part twice, letting the weight of those words settle on my chest like a hand pressing firmly but gently. I didn't cry. Not that night. There would be time for that later. Now I had a decision to make. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a notepad. I wrote 3 names, 3 people who supported my son when Audrey did not. 3 people who witnessed things, who knew things. One had access to medical records. Another had filed the company contracts. The third possessed personal messages that were never disclosed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. I would not let her rewrite his story. Not while I had breath in my lungs. Not while I still had his voice in my ears. The next morning, the news spread. Not about the money. That would come later. But about what happened at the church. About Audrey's entrance. About the confrontation. About the silence that followed. My phone rang before sunrise. Old neighbors, distant cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years calling to ask how I was doing. But beneath the concern, I could hear something more. Curiosity, hesitation, a slight questioning tone in their voices, as if they weren't sure which side of the story they believed yet. I didn't return the calls. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and watched the sky lighten over the backyard. The same backyard where my son had played when he was little, where we had barbecued on weekends, where I planted flowers during his first treatment. It was a quiet space, a good place to think. But the quiet didn't last. Around 10 in the morning, Audrey posted a picture, an old image of my son from years ago, one she had no right to share. The caption was short. "Heartbroken to say goodbye to the love of my life. May justice be served." Then came the comments. Most were from people who didn't know, or didn't care to know, the truth. People who took her version of the story and spread it like fire on dry straw. There were heart emojis, words like strength and unfair and tragic. Some mentioned lawyers. One said she should fight for what was hers. It was at that moment that things changed. I was already expecting a legal battle. I had already secured the documents, but this was something different. This was public. This was image. And if I had learned anything in the last decade, it was that people believe what they see first, even if it's a complete lie. I texted Sarah. The answer came back quickly. Already monitoring. We are preparing a timeline for disclosure. Within 1 hour, my son's chief financial officer, David, called to say he had received 2 calls from journalists asking about the widow. David said that word with a bitterness I appreciated deeply. I told him to wait. We weren't going to react. We were going to respond. And there is a fundamental difference between those 2 actions. At noon, I drove downtown to meet with Sarah. She had reserved a quiet room in a private library. Thick, soundproof walls. We didn't want prying ears. What we had to prepare was no longer just legal. It was reputational. Sarah presented the plan in 3 parts. First, confirm the legal position with the judge's temporary order and start the process for a permanent ruling to block Audrey's interference. That part was already underway. Second, gather all the personal evidence my son left and all the documentation from the people in his inner circle. David had emails and records proving Audrey never showed up during his illness. Jason, the attorney who handled the divorce, had notarized records of the divorce and property agreements. Nurse Lisa, the private nurse, had a written declaration about the last few months, including the calls Audrey never returned. Third, and this was the part Sarah hadn't told me yet, prepare a public event. Not just a press release or a legal petition, but something real, visible. A public commitment to the foundation my son wanted to create. Sarah believed that the best defense wasn't just a courtroom, it was public opinion. And she wasn't wrong. We chose a date 3 days from that moment. The location? The main conference room at Los Angeles City Hall. The mayor's office had already expressed support for the foundation months before, when my son was still alive, and discreetly laying the groundwork. We still had the letters, the licenses, everything he had prepared. We were simply continuing what he started. But I wasn't interested in staging a spectacle. I told Sarah that everything needed to remain centered on him, not on Audrey, not on me. The cause, the definition, the community impact, that was what mattered. Still, I knew Audrey would come, and I needed to be ready. That night, I visited the old company office where my son used to work. The lights were out, the furniture covered. The team had moved out after the sale, but David still had the keys. He met me out front and took me to his old desk. The chair was still there, as was the mug with his name on it, the whiteboard with half-erased notes about application features, in his handwriting that I would recognize among thousands. David handed me a flash drive without saying much, just pressing it into my hand with a determined nod. Inside were my son's last 2 months of private emails. He had filtered out everything irrelevant. What remained were communications about the foundation, his final medical instructions, and his last contacts with legal advisors. Later that night, I sat at my own desk, the same one where I used to prepare lessons when I was a teacher, and opened the flash drive. There were 3 emails marked with red stars. One for Sarah, one for David, one for me. The one for me was never sent. He had saved it as a draft. It read, "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if she shows up, I know it'll be hard. But I need you to remember that you are the only one who stayed. You were there when I couldn't get up, when I couldn't sleep, when I had no strength left. You never left my side. So don't let her rewrite what you and I lived. I chose you, not her. Never her." It was at that moment that my doubt disappeared. Not that I had planned to back down, but something inside me settled. I had carried grief and fury all week. Now, I had clarity. Audrey wanted to use public opinion as a weapon. I would raise the truth, not just in court, but in front of every person who had seen her post and believed the lie. 3 days after the funeral, I entered the city hall through the back entrance. Sarah had arranged it that way. Less noise, fewer eyes. The auditorium was already filling up. Local press, tech investors, community leaders. The mayor's office had confirmed attendance, not to give a speech, but to show support. That mattered more. The event was simple on paper, a dedication, the public launch of the Silva Memorial Foundation. But we all knew it was more than that. It was a message. Chairs were arranged in rows facing a projection screen. A banner was hung near the front, a legacy of purpose. My son's face was on the program, smiling that subtle way he always did when he was proud but didn't want attention. That smile would speak for him now. Sarah and David handled the press check-in. Jason was positioned near the side table with legal folders. Nurse Lisa offered to escort older guests. Everyone had a role. Everyone understood what was at stake. At 10 o'clock and 2 minutes, the doors closed. At 10 o'clock and 5 minutes, Sarah stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone once. She didn't smile. She wasn't there to charm anyone. "Good morning. We are here to honor the vision and values of a man who lived with brilliant purpose and left behind a plan for impact. What you will see today is not about loss. It is about intent, about clarity, about truth." She stepped aside and the lights dimmed. The screen lit up with a video dated 5 weeks before his death. My son was sitting in a chair, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes tired but focused. The background was his home office, the one full of books and plants and photos that I knew by heart. His voice came through, calm yet firm. "If you are watching this, then I am no longer here." But I wanted to explain in my own words why I made the choices I made. I didn't want confusion. I didn't want disputes. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. He went on to describe his illness, his hopes for the foundation, his decision to leave his assets to me, and only me, his reasons. They were not emotional, not vengeful. just deliberate and clear. "She left," he said without hesitation. "When I needed her most, she was not there. And when I built something worth coming back for, she returned. I cannot allow that to define my legacy. I am choosing the person who never left." The room was absolutely silent when the video ended. No coughing, no shifting, just stillness. I stood up, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I walked slowly to the podium, feeling the weight of every gaze. I had spoken in classrooms for 30 years. I had given speeches at graduations, peace meetings, school events. But this moment was different. It wasn't about celebration. It was about drawing a definitive line in the sand. I thanked everyone for being there. I acknowledged the mayor's presence. Then I read the names of the first scholarship recipients. I read the names of the local schools that would receive technology support. I outlined the treatment center that would bear my son's name. The audience listened intently. No one interrupted. Then I addressed the situation directly. Some of you may have seen posts online, heard rumors, read comments. I will not respond to gossip. I will respond with evidence. David dimmed the lights again. The screen showed my son's emails, labeled, dated, verified communications with Sarah, with David, with me. They documented his intentions, his revised inheritance plans, his canceled insurance beneficiary designations. Everything. The incontestable bedrock of facts. Next came digitized legal documents, the divorce decree, the signed settlement, the waiver of rights. Highlighted in yellow, the line where Audrey had signed her full consent to waive any future claims. Finally, the last slide. A screenshot of a message Audrey had sent to a close friend 6 weeks before the funeral. The message had been forwarded anonymously to Sarah's office. In it, Audrey wrote, "I don't care what it takes. I'm going back to take what should be mine. He owed me. And if his mother wants a war, I'm ready." I looked at the audience. That was her story. This is mine. And this foundation, this work, this legacy belongs to the man who earned it. Not the one who left him. Not the one who returned when the headlines appeared. A few people applauded. Then a few more. By the time I walked back from the podium, the entire room was applauding. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I just nodded once and returned to my seat. Audrey was there. I had seen her arrive late. She sat in the back row, wearing dark sunglasses, lips pressed tight. When the lights came back up, she stood and left. She didn't make a scene. She didn't speak. But her heels hammered hard against the floor as she walked out, as if she wanted to be heard, as if she wanted someone to chase her. No one did. Sarah leaned toward me. "She'll retaliate." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She would try, and we would be ready. After the event ended, people came up to me. They shook my hand. They told stories about my son that I had never heard before. A college classmate, a mentor from a startup incubator, a father whose son had benefited from the free application my son built in his final year. That afternoon, a picture of the event appeared in the local news. Me standing at the podium, one hand firm, the other holding the program. My son's face next to me on the screen. The caption read, "A mother protects her son's legacy." And that was exactly what I had done. Publicly, clearly, without shouting, without anger, but with every fact sharp as a blade. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No new messages, no missed calls, no emails from Sarah. But I did not mistake the stillness for peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. At 8:30, Sarah sent me a single message. "Stay off social media." Her tone was always controlled, but I could feel the urgency behind those 4 words. I obeyed, but I didn't have to wonder for long. David called 30 minutes later. "Audrey posted something, a video clip, cut up edits of your son out of context. It makes it look like he regretted changing the will." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The City Hall event had shaken her. Now she was playing dirty. That afternoon, Sarah and I met again in the same private room. She had already downloaded the clip, backed it up, transcribed it, and had a team verifying its edits. There was no full footage to match, no record of those words in any raw file. It was a fabrication, but it was subtle enough to deceive people who wanted to believe her. Sarah turned the laptop screen toward me and pressed play. My son's voice came through, but the phrases were clipped, rearranged, the pauses removed. He sounded unsure, overwhelmed. Then Audrey's voice layered over it. She spoke gently, with false sympathy, but every word implied that I had manipulated my son into excluding her. She had even titled the video, "The Truth They Don't Want You to Hear." It was already being shared in every corner of the internet. The comments shifted quickly. Strangers called her brave. Others called me controlling. Some suggested I had isolated my son during his illness, pushed away his friends, cut off contact with his ex-wife out of jealousy. Lies grow fast in the right soil. But we did not panic. Sarah already had the next move planned. The first part of Sarah's plan was simple. We would release the complete video in question, the untouched version, time-stamped, recorded in a single take. Jason had the original on a secure drive, protected by passwords and authentications that proved its integrity. The second part required more coordination. By the end of that day, David had secured permission from 3 of my son's former colleagues to share internal communications, archived emails, text messages, conversations from my son expressing his disappointment with Audrey's behavior over the years. In one message, dated 2 years before his death, he wrote, "She reached out again, not to ask about my health, not to apologize, just to know if the app was selling well. I'm tired of pretending people care when they don't. I don't have the energy for this anymore." Sarah gathered it all into a meticulously organized and labeled package as documentation of a pattern of behavior. Clean, professional, devastating in its simplicity. The next morning, we held a press conference. It wasn't flashy, no elaborate podium, no dramatization, just a conference room with a projector and printed packets for everyone present. Sarah opened with a single sentence that echoed through the room. "Misinformation is dangerous. Here is the truth." Then we played the full original video, my son's unedited message, calm, clear, confident. He explained his decisions, without hesitation, without confusion. He named me as his sole executor, his only caregiver, his only remaining family. We distributed the written evidence. We allowed time for questions. We didn't offer sound bites. We didn't create narrative twists. We simply presented incontestable facts. Audrey did not respond publicly, but she didn't need to. The damage to her credibility was already visible. That night, one of the community blogs that had praised her earlier issued a quiet retraction. Another removed her manipulated video. A third posted side-by-side transcripts showing how the clip had been altered. Still, it wasn't enough. Not for me. The facts were on my side, but I wasn't just chasing facts. I was chasing absolute clarity. So I made a decision. I called David and asked him to release the internal memo my son had written during his last hospital stay. It had been intended for the company staff, but the tone was deeply personal. The memo detailed his plan for the foundation, his reasons for creating it in my name, his desire to distance the organization from anyone who had abandoned him. At the end, he wrote, "I don't want my name used for anything false, anything superficial. If people are going to remember me, let it be for what I actually did and who truly supported me." Sarah hesitated before agreeing. It was a powerful piece, but it would also stir things up again. I told her that was precisely the goal. The memo went live at noon, published with the staff's consent and endorsed by the foundation. It didn't attack Audrey directly. It didn't mention her by name. But it exposed every lie she had told simply by existing. Like a beam of light dispelling shadows. By evening, I started receiving messages. Strangers, survivors of serious illnesses, caregivers, people who had watched loved ones die slowly and alone. They wrote to say they understood. They believed me. They had seen people show up too late just to claim something they hadn't earned. But even that didn't fully satisfy me, because Audrey wasn't finished. At 10 o'clock and 30 minutes that night, Sarah called me again. She filed a motion to contest the will. She alleges your son was coerced. She alleges he lacked full mental capacity when he made the final changes. I asked Sarah how strong the claim was. Weak, she replied, but it will force a formal response. It will trigger discovery. It will open records. I told her I wasn't afraid of records. Let her finish, because the deeper she goes, the more she'll uncover the truth she was trying to bury. This is no longer just about a lie. It's about character. And character has a longer reach than money. The motion arrived late on a Thursday. Sarah forwarded me the document at 9 o'clock and 42 minutes, exactly as I knew she would. Clean, annotated, with a short note at the bottom. You don't have to respond yet, but you should see this. I read every page with meticulous care. Audrey's legal team accused me of undue influence. They claimed my son had been emotionally manipulated, that I had isolated him, that I had coerced him into rewriting the will when his mind was clouded by medication and illness. They called me controlling, manipulative, dominant. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help him with homework, the same table where I had held his hand after the diagnosis, trying to make him believe everything would be okay, even when we both knew it wouldn't. Now, that table held an accusation that I had stolen from him, bent him to my will, used his pain for my own benefit. I let myself feel it completely. Not the anger, not yet. The pain. It settled in my chest like something old returning, something with weight, something I thought I had made peace with. This pain came back that night, because reading that motion was reliving every hour I had sat by his side, every time I had held his hand while he tried to sleep despite the pain, every time I had helped the nurse move him when he was too weak to turn. Every night I stayed awake to make sure he was breathing. They called me manipulative, but they weren't there when I read to him while we waited for test results. When I changed the sheets in the middle of the night. When I massaged his tense shoulders so he could relax. They weren't there the night he woke up crying and couldn't remember where he was. They weren't there the afternoon he asked me, clearly and with full awareness, to ensure she never touched what he had built. I was, so I let the weight settle. I didn't fight it. I didn't push it away. I poured myself a glass of water. I stood still, perfectly motionless, as I let the words wash over me, and I remembered exactly who I was. Not the woman they described on paper, but the mother who stayed. The next morning, I met with Sarah at her office. She had already drafted our initial response, but before we filed anything, we sat in silence for a while. She watched me, as if she was waiting for me to concede, or explode in anger, or collapse in tears. I did none of that. I just said, "Let's do this cleanly. Let's make this final." She nodded with a small look of approval. We agreed to prepare a full sworn declaration. Nurse Lisa's testimony as the nurse, David's statement as director, Jason's notarized records. We would include the entire email chain documenting my son's requests, his voice recording, his private memo, everything. But I didn't want the next step to be just legal. It needed something more. I told Sarah I wanted to write a letter. Not to the court, but to the foundation, to the community. She hesitated briefly, but agreed. That weekend, I sat down with a pen and wrote by hand. I kept it simple. I am not the voice of my son, but I am the echo of what he believed. He believed in fairness, in decency, in the truth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. He built what he built not for fame or legacy, but because he wanted to help people, to leave something useful behind. I stood by him. I didn't do it for reward. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved him, and because I believe in what he wanted this foundation to be. The following week, Sarah filed the complete rebuttal. It was longer than the original motion, more detailed, more substantial, with irrefutable documentation. Then we waited. During that time, Audrey did exactly what I expected. She went to the press, gave interviews, played the part of the inconsolable widow, spoke about love and memory and heartbreak. She shared carefully selected photos. She cried when the cameras demanded it. But something had changed. The public was no longer so sure. Some articles started using the word alleged before her claims. Commentators began referencing the full video, the emails, the obvious contradictions between what she said and what the documents showed. The truth doesn't always move fast, but it moves steadily and relentlessly. Sarah told me it could take weeks for the judge to review the motion. She warned me that Audrey could push for a hearing, try to delay things, try to wear us down with time. I told her I wasn't worried, because I had already waited for worse things. I had waited for blood tests and biopsy results and the sound of machines beeping in the middle of the night. Waiting for court dates and document reviews didn't scare me. Not like watching your son fade, day by day, hour by hour. During those waiting days, I kept myself busy. I spent mornings at the foundation office reviewing scholarship proposals, meeting with the new director, putting together evaluation panels. I made sure the work moved forward. I kept my hands occupied so my heart wouldn't be overwhelmed by the weight of the wait. One afternoon, while reviewing budget reports, a volunteer walked in with a letter. It was handwritten, with no return address. Inside was a simple message. You are not alone. I believe you. I watched my sister be destroyed by someone like her. Thank you for speaking up. There was no signature. Just those few lines. It reminded me that what we were doing wasn't just about property or inheritance. It was about putting the story right. Not with fire, but with focus. Not with volume, but with incontestable truth. That was what Audrey never understood. She thought power came from noise, from dramatic accusations. But I had learned that real power comes from consistency. And I would be consistent until the end. The decision arrived on a Wednesday morning. It was quiet. No television, no camera crews, no screaming headlines about justice or fraud. Just a notification from Sarah that the court had issued its ruling. She had forwarded the official copy to my inbox. 78 pages. I read every one. The motion to contest the will was rejected in full. No trial, no hearing. The judge had found the evidence clear and convincing. My son had full mental capacity. He had made his decisions deliberately. There was no sign of coercion, manipulation, or external pressure. Audrey's claims were described as unsubstantiated, speculative, and in several instances, intentionally misleading. That last sentence mattered more than all the others. Intentionally misleading. In courtroom language, that meant more than just losing. It meant exposure. It meant vulnerability. It meant consequences. The next step moved faster than even Sarah expected. Within 48 hours, the court ordered a hearing to review possible sanctions against Audrey's legal team for misuse of process, abuse of the system, attempt to deceive a probate court with altered materials. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Initially, I didn't plan to attend. I had told myself that the rejection was enough, that I didn't need to see the consequences, that I already had what I came for. My son's wishes protected, his legacy intact. But 2 days before the hearing, Sarah called. Audrey had sent a last-minute request. She wanted the hearing closed to the public, citing emotional distress, claiming it would harm her reputation, claiming it would interfere with her to seek work and rebuild her life. The judge denied her request. It was then that I decided I would be there, sitting in the back row, silently witnessing the end of this story. I arrived early on the day of the hearing. The room was small, no media, just the parties, their lawyers, and a few court staff. Sarah sat beside me, her posture relaxed but alert. Audrey entered 5 minutes before the start, wearing a discreet, serious black suit. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. She didn't look around the room. She knew I was there, but she didn't meet my gaze. The judge entered. The hearing began without ceremony, without drama, without theatrics. Just a methodical analysis of what had happened. They reviewed the motion Audrey had filed, the video she had posted, the way it had been edited, the sworn declarations that contradicted her version of events. They analyzed the financial records, the legal history, her pattern of communication with people close to my son, the timing of her appearance, Her social media statements before and after the funeral. They dissected everything, piece by piece, exposing every contradiction. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been misled, that she hadn't fully understood the risks, that she had acted out of grief. But the judge interrupted him with words I will never forget. Grief over losing a man you abandoned does not excuse the manipulation of this court. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that the sanctions would be severe. Audrey's lawyer would face a formal review by the state bar. She would be required to pay the legal fees associated with responding to her fraudulent motion. The amount was considerable. The court issued a freeze on her accounts pending payment. It wasn't prison. It wasn't a national scandal. But it was the legal version of a reckoning. The truth finally exacting its price. I watched her face as the judge read the decision. Her expression didn't change. Not once. But her hands betrayed her apparent calm. Clenching, unclenching, one after the other in a nervous rhythm. When the judge adjourned the hearing, Sarah and I stood up. We did not approach Audrey. We did not linger. But as we walked toward the exit, she turned slightly. Not enough to make eye contact, but enough for me to see the vacant look in her eyes. She had entered this battle thinking she could bend reality to her will. She left with her name tainted in official court records, her finances frozen, her story unraveled like a web of lies. That afternoon, Sarah sent a statement to the Foundation's press contacts. Brief, professional. The Silva Foundation respects the court's findings and remains committed to carrying forward the mission set forth by its founder. We consider this matter resolved. No triumphalism, no tone of revenge, just finality. I sat in my garden that night alone, on the same bench where my son once sat after his first day of treatment, and I breathed in the quiet. Not complete peace, not yet, but the quiet that comes after a door is finally closed. In the following weeks, the foundation flourished. We received more offers for partnerships than we could accept. The first scholarship recipients were already being selected. The treatment center was beginning to take shape. As for Audrey, she disappeared from public life as completely as she had disappeared from my son's life 8 years earlier. No more posts, no more interviews, no more letters or emails or attempts at contact. One day, I received some mail. A simple envelope, no return address, just my name on the front. Inside, there was no letter, just an old photo of my son as a child, and a slip of paper with a single word. Forgive. I did not respond. There was no need. That chapter was closed. Not with a scream or a celebration, but with the calm certainty of someone who protected what mattered. I still receive letters from women I have never met, from daughters watching their mothers suffer, from mothers watching their sons become strangers. They don't ask for magic, just truth. And I give it to them, simple and unwavering. You are not alone. You never were. Your story does not end with the abandonment. You can draw the line. You can take the pen back. And even if the world never applauds, your piece is the most important applause. Now, if you like this story, click on the next video that is appearing on the screen, because in it, there is a story of betrayal and reversal like you have never seen before.